Hi, everybody. Welcome to LEDA's Facebook and YouTube live streams. Today and for the next 2 Wednesdays, we're going to have a very special program. We are going to be focusing on the 21-day equity challenge that we were challenged by the Greater Ottawa County United Way. So I will be bringing on one person from the United Way and then another person from Ottawa County. They will each introduce themselves. I am Gloria Lara, and I am honored to serve as Executive Director of the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance.
Hi,
Sorry.
Thought you were going to do it one at a time. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, hi, I'm Liz De La Luz. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact at Greater Ottawa County United Way, and I've been in my position for about 15 years.
Hi, everybody. My name is Robyn Afrik. I am the Ottawa County Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I've been with the county for a little over a year.
So I thought maybe to set, the situation, I wanted to ask each of you, where did you grow up? And what were your influences? Liz?
So I grew up in Fenville, Michigan, which is just a stone's throw away from Holland, and Holland was my stomping ground. But I grew up in Fenville, and when I went through Fenville Public Schools, there were only a handful of Latino or minority families. The rest of our population was predominantly white.
Okay. Robyn?
Yeah, so I grew up on the south side of Holland in the little town of Graafschap, and was raised actually in that area since 6 months of age. I am a transracial adoptee, originally from Korea, and yeah, pretty much that was my stomping ground, south side of Holland, predominantly for the whole entirety of my life.
Great. Well, I am a second-generation Californian. My parents were born in Los Angeles area, and I was born in Los Angeles, and that's where I grew up. And growing up, I tell people, everyone around me looked like me. Everyone was brown. I didn't really have much contact with white people or Black people until after I graduated from high school and started going to school and working. So my influences were a little bit different. I am a proud Latina, and Spanish is my first language, although I don't practice it enough. So let's get started. So Liz, can you please tell us about the 21-day equity challenge and how the Greater Ottawa County United Way got involved in it?
Sure. So I'm going to take us on a little bit of a journey here before I get to answer that question directly. Participated in the ALICE report or the ALICE project, and Michigan was fortunate enough to be in the first cohort. If you haven't heard of ALICE, ALICE is Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed, and the United Way recently released an ALICE and Black households data report. And in that report, it clearly illustrates the inequities that are deeply rooted in national, state, and local systems and institutions. So the equity challenge was kind of from the result of the ALICE project. And it's simple. Our hope is that to provide individuals across our community, Ottawa County, the opportunity to commit to deepening their understanding and their willingness to confront racism for 21 consecutive days. And at the end of the 21 days, our hope is that those same individuals will have raised their awareness, changed their understanding, and shifted the way that they behave. All through reading, listening, watching, and reflecting each day. And I'm really proud that United Way was able to bring this to our community.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Liz. I think it helps to understand the foundation of what we're doing. Just a little brief aside, I think the first organizations that did this were food sources or food banks in Massachusetts and New England. And it turns out that my husband's cousin, we're really closely connected to, was part of this when it first started. So I called her really excited saying, hey, we're doing this too. So so I'm letting her know how we're doing on this. So this is something that is starting to spread nationally, which is excellent. So before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone, both, that are watching, that everyone is unique and that none of us speaks for all other people of our race or ethnic group. So I'm hoping that everyone has a spirit of curiosity and for us to learn from each other as individuals with different expressions or experiences. Our hope is that these discussions will help one another grow and learn and commit to taking action to undo racism. The work of these discussions is to get us into the stretch zone where we experience some discomfort. So this experience, this stretching, this discomfort, that's okay because it means you're learning. If you think about it when you're working out, if you start working out your muscles and, without you know that you're working them when you start feeling a little bit of pain, a little bit of stretching, and you just have to keep at it so that you become very good at using those particular muscles. This is the same way. So let's get started. And as each of us, I'm going to keep all of us up so that we can actually talk to each other. I told everyone that, I told Liz and Robyn that this is going to be like The View, except a bit more serious, hopefully. But I hope that we're also able to laugh during this time. So Liz, can you reflect on what really affected you during these first 6 days of challenge?
Yeah, I think before we got started, we were kind of talking a little bit, and you touched on one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and that was the videos the first day. I believe it was from the New York Times, and they were short little videos. And the one that I watched was preparing your son for being a Black boy into a Black man in America. And I found that extremely heartbreaking. The reality that Black families have to have this discussion with their Black sons is heartbreaking for me. I have a son. I married a white man, so my kids are biracial, half white, half Mexican. And my son looks more white than he looks brown. So he never has to worry about that. But again, just the thought that you have to have that conversation with your son as a Black man, because as a boy, not so threatening, but as they grow up, society views them as threatening. And having a son of my own, that to me is extremely heartbreaking. So that was, I think, for the first day, that kind of just punched me in the gut, literally.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I had the same feeling. I married a Black man, so we have a daughter, and she's biracial, but she's Latina, Mexican, and Black. And ever since George Floyd's murder, even before, but more recently, my husband and I would be talking. I said, we are so glad that we have a daughter and not a son. Because think about what has to happen all his life. If our son was Black, he would have to be concerned about so many things, being very careful about if he gets stopped by the police, where he puts his hands. And that's not even always a guarantee. With our daughters, once they get past a certain age, you stop worrying as much about them because they can pretty much take care of themselves. But with sons, I don't know. I found that heartbreaking as well. So. Robyn, what affected you in the first few days?
Yeah, I think, well, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, right? How when you're actually doing this work as a profession,
Mm-hmm.
and then having to live it out as a person beyond a profession, I think for me, that question becomes how much are you and can you actually detach? Or can you even detach, right? And so there's pros and cons, obviously to both, but you know, listening to both of your stories, and I'm obviously learning a little bit more about each of you. I too have married a gentleman who is Black, and we have what we call Blasian children, Asian and Black. And, you know, even just raising children, right, in spaces like the ones that we're in today, I often am having to recognize the amount of energy that it takes to have to think through every possible thing that could happen. Whereas some folks may never have to think about that, right? And it's all the what ifs, and that can be extremely exhausting. There is a wonderful woman, and this is personal in my space, right? There's a woman that I have researched quite a bit. Her name is Susan Harris O'Connor, and she has put together a really fascinating model around identity. And what I appreciate, I won't go into it here, but what I appreciate is that she really helps people try to understand, especially when you hear these stories, how do we learn how to have pride in our own genetic racial identity? But then there's this thing called imposed racial identity, where it's how the world sees us and values us based on what's imposed and what's not. And so just having to be able to learn and teach that just to my kids, right? It's work, but it's necessary. So.
Yeah, I know it was quite a sobering series of videos to start this whole challenge with. The other thing is, you know, I looked at talking about, you know, how people of color develop their racial identity. I looked at that document, and it was very scholarly in a way. And I was still trying to understand it. I don't know if either of you had an opportunity to look at that or not.
Yeah, I looked at that too. I think that was one of the things yeah, like you said, it was kind of scholarly. So I just kind of went through it. I didn't take a deep dive into it like I did some other things.
Yeah. So so it was a little bit, it's like, okay, I can see how someone might think that, and might be interesting to have a one-on-one discussion with someone, or even with people who work with that model, because that was, you know, I always like to, when I look at a situation, how did we get here? And what was the history? You know, what happened years ago that, you know, we're living in the unintended consequences of what happened. And, you know, part of that, and we're going to skip around a little bit, but I don't know if you had a chance to really look at, I think there was a video about redlining. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. I think it was today's.
The video I watched today was on the TED Talk.
Okay, no, I didn't see that. Could you please tell us about that, please?
Well, before I go there, I wanted to go back to Robyn's comment about living in the space on a professional level and then in a personal level. And for me, this has been a really a new process for me. So growing up in Fenville and it being predominantly white, my parents moved from Texas to Michigan. And the last of the first four of my older siblings had a really hard time learning English. And therefore, my parents decided not to teach the last three of us Spanish. And so for me, I was taught at a very early age to assimilate surroundings, right? Very unintentional. I mean, you know, my parents didn't know that would have benefited the last three significantly, but it is a space where I'm at. So all of this these days that we're having. Yes, I helped work on the days and, help put things together and localize some information and stuff. But for me, I have really been taking on the challenge as just learning. So for me, this has been a huge learning experience overall. And some of the things that I, brought of this is just new information, like I said, and not that I didn't know that racism was here and present, but it is just such a good reminder for anybody at any different level of what is here, and just recognizing who you are and where you're at in your journey.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, between the personal and the professional. Before I transitioned professionally over to working for nonprofits, I spent many years in the automotive industry in Southeast Michigan, the Detroit area. So people nowadays ask me, gee, what was it like being a Latina in the automotive industry? And I looked at them and I laughed. I said, listen, they didn't even know back then what Latinas were. The focus was me being a woman without an engineering degree, very well educated, I knew what I was talking about, but their bias was, that I was a woman and I didn't have an engineering degree, even though I had an MBA. So it depends on where you are, where you're sitting at that point in time, and then you have to look and see what are people's perceptions, what are their biases. And in that particular case, their bias was against women and people without engineering degrees. And then you get into other areas, and the bias might be against, people of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I think you also professionally have to see where are you and how do you act in that situation.
So Gloria, can I ask you a question as a follow-up?
Sure. Yeah.
You started out in the automotive industry in the year that you were, and recognizing, right, who you are, whether it's genetically and your gender identity, but then what was imposed upon you, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what was. How did that then affect you? What was it in you then that made the decisions that you made to still move forward? And what kind of information did you have to process to get there?
I was lucky enough, or not lucky enough, but I had earned my position into what they would call the high achievers or the high potential group.
Okay.
So being in that group gave you some kind of, quote, privilege. Everyone has a kind of privilege, and I think later on we'll be talking about white privilege. But then there's also privilege that you earn. So I earned that privilege, and so I was able to go into different areas of the organization, knowing that I had that high potential privilege behind me. And so that gave me the credibility to move around and to actually perform and get heard. So one of the things, maybe we'll talk about this later, is how do you use your own privilege? Because everyone probably has some privilege. They may not be aware of it. And there's different forms of privilege, like I said, earned and unearned, which is something that I just ran across in doing this challenge. It's like, that's what that is. That's earned privilege. What most of white privilege is unearned, because you haven't earned it because you were born with it.
Right. Yeah, let's talk about that challenge. I mean, did you guys take that privilege test? I took the privilege test, and I got a pretty good score. Okay, I got some privilege. And then we were on our staff call, and one of my coworkers, threw out her number, which was 67. And I was like, I guess I'm not that privileged. My number was 52. And then I was talking about it around the dinner table, and my daughter took the test and she got a 40. And it was shocking to me that she got a 40. But then when I stepped back and I thought about it, she is part of the LGBTQ community. And when through that list of questions, there were a lot of questions that she had to put check marks by because she had been called names. She had been, had the Bible thrown at her and all of these things. But to really, as a mother, when she first came out, I was extremely nervous. We live in a very conservative community, and although her classmates were extremely supportive of her, I had to say not every parent of that classmate will be. And we want to protect our kids, right? I mean, she's 21. She's not a child anymore, but still hearing her score really, again, another gut punch for me. And how do I help her, with that?
And looking, okay, day 6, today's day, levels of racism. One of the things that they were talking about is the levels on which racism exists. And I think most of us, when we think of racism, think of the first 2 levels, which is internalized, which is, what do you believe, and then interpersonal. And I'm reading directly from this. So it's interpersonal is bigotry and biases shown between individuals through word and action. So that's what we're afraid of. And when we call someone a racist, they're concerned because you're doing it. It's an interpersonal aspect, whether or not they think they are. I was reading someplace that calling someone a racist now is horrendous for most people. But without the definition, without understanding what that is, and without understanding the implications, I think we need to sort of take a step back and sort of try and make certain that we're all looking at it at the same level. Can either of you, Robyn, you look like you're
pulling up the materials.
Yes. Quick, where is it?
Let me make sure I've got it here. Repeat the question, Gloria. I'm sorry.
Well, about, because you have I think you're in a very interesting position with the county, and I know that there's a lot of people probably wondered, why do we need a diversity, equity, and inclusion director in the county? We're fine. We get along well with every one another. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that people might be mixing up institutional racism with interpersonal and internalized racism.
Yeah, if you're going to apply that information to this framework, then yes. So I'm going to back up completely and just say, whenever you're doing any kind of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right, you have to understand. I think people know this intrinsically, but they don't say it. When people come to the table and you hear just the definition, diversity, equity, inclusion, everybody has a different definition. Mm-hmm. Everybody comes to the table with, oh, diversity is this, cats and dogs, right? Diversity is, oh, well, hey, you know what? We have different hair color today. And while that is true, right, that those things are true qualifiers, it's so important moving forward in any organization or working with people that you both figure out, okay, yes, but what do we mean in this context? What are we achieving here in this space? The other thing, too, is people don't understand what equity is versus equality, right? They mix the two terms up quite a bit. And I think that it's very important to define those. And here again, I'm not in the space to say to you, Gloria, or Liz, or United Way, hey, you have to use this term. But I think it's important that people educate themselves enough to know that if they're going to use equity versus equality, they know why, they know what they're doing with that, right? And how to hold each other accountable. Inclusion is the same thing. So yes, Gloria, that's a long way of saying in a roundabout way. And again, applying it to this material here, if we're looking at the framework of, hey, being inclusive means I just don't call you a bad name, or we rid ourselves of these biases, quote unquote, right? And never get at the structural piece, right? Then someone, I'm not saying everyone, but someone who has a different definition will come into the conversation and go, you're not doing this work. What are you doing? You're actually causing more problems. You'll have someone else who says, I have no idea what you're talking about when it comes to structural stuff. I don't even think that's true, right? So let's just keep it at this level. So I think that is a bigger conversation, and the fact that, the 21-day equity challenge is bringing in some definitions and terms to consider, because it's real, it's out there. Then that's how we have this. So.
Yeah, and you're right, Robyn, because when I as LEDA, we go out and do our workshops and training, we first start off with some very basic definitions, because everyone thinks they know what equity means and equality means until we actually define it and have them discuss it among themselves. Then they start internalizing and says, oh, I get it. And so then let's go on with diversity, which is more than just the color of your skin.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's also where you grew up, your religion. I mean, there's so many things for diversity. And I think doing that, what was it, that bias or the privilege walk, talking about the privilege walk.
Yes.
Where and if people aren't familiar with it, it's can one of you explain the privilege walk? I don't want to be the only one doing the talking.
Have you done it, Liz? Go for it.
No, I haven't done it, but I saw the video of it and I thought it was really empowering. And I'm sure, it's been on Facebook, years ago, and is everybody starting out at a same starting point, and then based on the questions, they either take a step forward or they take a step back. And at the end, you look at where you're at, and it's a really great discussion point. And I think, if anything, for any group or family even, it would be a really great thing to be able to visually see where people are at, and those people that take a step forward and those people that take a step back, and at the end look at where you're at, and have that open discussion. I think it's a really great starting point. I know that I had an executive director call me out on that, and he was super excited about it and was like, I want to do this with my staff like ASAP. So, for me as the United Way employee that's putting this together, and to hear that excitement from people, I think is so, and I love it that it is enlightening people. And I think that that's really what, like I said at the beginning, if we can give them an opportunity to learn something, to read something, to listen, and to reflect, I think is a great deal. And I just noticed in the comments that Raina put that is a hurtful activity for some. And I agree with that comment totally. And I think that's a discussion that needs to be had with the group itself, right? And I think that when you go into these conversations and you both work in this area, it's extremely important to have that trust factor, and that, that factor going into an exercise like this, trust in one another, and openness for each other. So.
Exactly. Robyn, have you done the privilege walk?
Yeah, I've done versions of that, as well as the unpacking the knapsack thing, quite a bit. And I've actually conducted it with students and, different groups. So yes, I agree. It is a very powerful visual for people to see, to get out of the cognitive space. I do agree with Raina, though, that it can be absolutely hurtful for some, especially if there are those, obviously, who are in the back, or however you want to define it, because our world has been socialized, right, to always compare. And I think that whoever does the facilitation, or whoever is looking at what's the end goal, needs to obviously have that cultural intelligence enough to be able to manage some of that.
So, I was talking, a friend of mine was sharing with me his first example with the privilege walk. This is a young man who grew up in Hudsonville, tall, young, white guy. And he did it in college. And, he's just, booking on ahead. And when they got done, he was way ahead of everyone else. And he felt so bad about that, because up until then he hadn't really realized about what white privilege was. And then there are some people that take it and get insulted because they're, you look at, first of all, yes, it could be a very hurtful activity for people, especially if you're the one that has to keep taking steps back and you realize how much more advantages other people had than you just because of where you live, where you were born, where you went to school, who your parents were, what language you speak, what resources are available to you. You realize that, that this doesn't really, for the first time, that, wow, there's a lot going on that I had no idea about, that now I know why certain people are always getting, we call all the goodies. But then let's look at it the other way. I thought that day 4 was interesting, particularly for the 3 of us, because we're talking about white fragility. And, there's white people that get upset when these issues are pointed out. They get uncomfortable. And lately I've been telling them, okay, well, we've had slaves here for 400 years. So, you're uncomfortable for a little bit, let's talk about it, because that's a very small period of time compared to what has been happening. What were your thoughts about white fragility, that particular challenge?
Go ahead, Liz.
So I downloaded the 28 common racist attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
I downloaded that and I actually read that thoroughly through. And like I said at the beginning, I grew up in Fenville, predominantly white, was taught early to assimilate. And what I found, which is really kind of hard to say, this is me being completely vulnerable at this point with the two of you and all of the people on Facebook, I found myself having said some of those attitudes. And that was truly eye-opening for me, in the fact that I've had those comments some of those comments come out of my mouth, but then again, I appreciated the attitude and then the reality check and the consequences that went along with it, each attitude. And again, eye-opening for me on a personal level, and something that I want to keep at the forefront of my mind when I speak into those.
Right. I mean, I have it with me as well, and I'm looking at it, and it was sort of like, wow, yeah, I don't really think I said many of these, but I think the one that really resonated with me was silence. You stay silent. If people are saying things or doing things, Robyn, you asked me how I dealt with, these issues in industry and automotive. Lots of times I just ignored it and pretended. It brings right past it, like I never saw it, I never heard it, nothing. It's just, I completely ignored it because I didn't, number one, have the confidence, or I felt the gravitas or the executive level to speak out against it. And another one is I didn't know what to say. You call out someone that's your boss's boss for saying a statement like that. What do you do? And so that's sort of like, I think for me, that was the biggest thing, is that whole silence issue, because like Liz said, we're taught to assimilate. We're taught, don't stick out, pretend, be like everyone else and you'll get ahead. Because that was the message that I got too growing up, Liz, was to assimilate.
Yeah. And the other one I think was, pull up your bootstraps, and if you work hard enough, you'll get it. And, you'll get there, you'll achieve, that success will come to you. And if it doesn't, then it's your fault, right? You didn't pull up your bootstraps hard enough. And that's just not true. Like, yeah. I mean, that was, again, just some really, for me, like I said, you two have definitely, you work in the profession, you've been on the journey. For me, it's definitely, I am trying to find my voice as a Latina and recognize the influence that I have, and how can I use that in a positive way, and bring that to the conversation. Yeah.
So some of that, and let's circle back to a topic we briefly mentioned about privilege, because what you were talking about, Liz, is, the reason, many people in that whole Rachel Alger story of pulling yourself up by your bootstrap, doing it yourself. So much of that is because of the privilege that white people have because of being born white. And if you don't have that privilege, if you're not living, or if your parents don't have decent jobs, living in a good neighborhood, so you have good schools to go to, and you go to a really great college, and then you have a name like John Smith instead of Juan Sanchez, your resume, it's John Smith, gets looked at a lot faster than Juan Sanchez, even though you both went to the same school, had the same GPA. But yet John Smith says, yes, I did it all by myself. And Juan Sandoval is Sanchez. Yeah. Juan Sanchez is thinking, gosh, why can't I get a break? So let's talk a little bit about that. So Robyn?
Well, again, it kind of goes back to the conversations we were having earlier around how we have been socially conditioned, right, as a society first, and also individually, what's been validated or revalidated through our own experiences. And it tells us in our subconscious, like, what is better, what is not as good, quote unquote, right? We may say, oh, no, that's not true. But then you look at the results, right, over time, you look at trends, you look at studies, and you the dashboard, right? And so, those are just indicative, I think, or those are symptoms of a greater issue that we just can't seem to address. And yes, it has to do with, when again, in this framework of the 21-day equity challenge and the material that they're sharing here in this space, they're starting out with the fact that, yes, systems also have to change in order to be able to reflect the validation of this different ideology. But at the same time, people have to hold themselves accountable, right, to knowing that they have their own biases or their implicit biases that cause them, right, to maybe choose a different name over another, right? And so it's a both and.
Right. And, and Robyn, like you said, since both of us do this professionally, I'm trying to remember, okay, was this particular video that I'm thinking about in this challenge, or is this something else that I saw?
I don't know. I didn't get to watch all the videos. So, if there's a specific one, obviously, but I think that there's some things that will cross over, right?
Right. Exactly. I mean, let's, so we've taken a couple of deep dives. Let's get way up into the, 30,000 foot level. What is your hope that what the community will do, or will feel like, or will take action? Because a lot of people, the three of us are not part of the white population in Ottawa County. We are in positions where we are able to influence. And I think all of us, the three of us do, really focus in on that. But for the general population who is doing this, what would be your hopes?
For me, I think that, and this is more on a personal level than a strategic thinking level of United Way as a whole. But for me, I think the fact that people will start talking about it, I think that things have happened and things are happening. But I think for the general population, if we can get them to just start talking about the racism issue and even the different levels of racism and recognizing that. I think that's, and then like Robyn said earlier, that we each recognize our own personal bias, because everybody has them, no matter what color or race that you are.
Great. Robyn?
I'm going to take a moment. I got to think about that one. What you got?
Well, I'll key in on something that Liz said. Being able to start talking about it, I think, is a really great start, beginning steps. If you think about it, and the example that I use for those of us old enough to remember when Jerry Ford was president, right after he became president, Betty Ford was diagnosed with breast cancer. Up until then, he didn't say the word breast in public. It wasn't on the news. It wasn't in the media. No one talked about it. But she brought it out into the public. And all these years later, people say, have you had your mammograms? Have you had your breast care check? So-and-so suffered from breast cancer. We had the breast, Susan B. Komen Walk for the Cure. So it's out there, and the incidence has really gone down because people have really started talking about it and become comfortable, more and more comfortable with talking about it and acting about it. And that's sort of my hope with talking about all these issues, is that people start saying, people will start conversations with saying, I know this is really hard to talk about, but I said, the more we talk about it, the easier it becomes. And then we start focusing on the issues and solutions rather than on the word racism.
Right.
So this is a hard one for me, very honestly, because I'm going to set my brain outside of my personal selfish space and recognize that, yes, while we have to continue or start talking about these things, I also know there's a group of folks in our community, right, who are like, we're so tired of talking about it, and we need to move. So there's this weird dichotomy between both and I also look at the fact that neither are wrong. They're both right in their own understanding and where they are, right? Meet people where they are. You also have to make sure that people need to, feel like, okay, but your inability to move is causing more pain on my ability to have to talk, right? There's this weird relationship. And I also think one of the things for my community, and I say this because I live here, I grew up here, I have my children here, to do any of this work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and I have to remind people this, as much as it's hard to hear, it is, and I've probably said this a million times in other podcasts, but it is so much not even just a DEI issue as it is a leadership issue, and it is also messy. This work is messy. It's not clean cut. It doesn't always allow for PC conversations. Now it can. But I think that, and again, I'm going back to my own personal way that I was raised in this community. We don't like to be messy. We love to be able to carry a great positive image. And while that's important, I also have to say, it's like telling someone who has cancer, right? Like, hey, there's something going on here. We need to get better. If we can't name that and we're afraid of a messy surgery to get better, then what are we really saying, right? So I think that it's not just that we need to talk, but we also have to think about how we talk about it and what is what are the things we're really trying to go after and how do we orchestrate that well. So that was a really long answer to world peace, but in all honesty,
no, I think that's great. No, I think that's I think you worded that very well. And being that we are in the community that we're in, we grew up in this community. And you're right, we do like to be clean and let it, fit a certain mold and cut off the excess and we're good because this is our way. I think that Ottawa County leads in many, many aspects around the state.
Absolutely.
We're a very collaborative community, and they're in many different sectors. People say, oh, you're doing it the Ottawa way, because we are so collaborative. And I think that this is an issue that as a county, as a large community, we need to embrace and work together at it. Because it's not just one sector that can work on this, right? It's all of the sectors working together to continue to move this forward. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be clean cut. It is going to be messy. I really appreciate that comment, Robyn.
This is true.
Yeah, but I appreciate it, not having lived here or not having grown up here, but looking at Ottawa County with a different lens, I really appreciate so many people and organizations and businesses really looking at these issues, saying, we really do need to take a leadership role in this. And that doesn't happen everywhere. So I think that we have started on a really great, messy journey, but it really feeds into the strengths of this community to try and make it, keep it vibrant. And so what do we have to do in order to make certain that it's vibrant? Well, we need to be certain that everyone feels comfortable and is a part of this community. That's part of LEDA's mission, is make sure Ethnic Diversity Alliance. As part of our mission is to help people contribute. So we've been on this journey for a long time. But if you think of people who have been, enslaved, 400 years, that's a long time. So this is just a drop in the bucket. So we're getting close to the end of our time for today. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to say something about, or give us something to send us off into the next week of challenges?
Well, I think one of the questions that we had talked about earlier was, can people still join? And people can still join the challenge. You're just not going to get the first 6 days. And that's okay. I think that people can still join the journey. And, I believe that it's put up in the comments. You can go to the United Way website, www.ottawaunitedway.org, and then /21-day equity challenge is what it is. So people can still join the conversation. I encourage people to reach out to me, if not the other two, where, if you have questions, comments, something particular that you would like us to talk about when our next time comes, reach out, let us know, and we can bring it up, or you can put it in the chat box. I will say, I just saw the last comment there by Jessica DeJohn that says, it's not West Michigan nice, and that makes people uncomfortable. That's so true. And I really appreciate, Gloria, you sharing your platform with United Way and with Ottawa County to have these conversations. So yeah, I would just say, have people sign up.
Thank you,
We're
Robyn.
actually telling the first 6 days somewhere. I'm kidding. Don't tell Patrick I said that. No, again, I'm appreciative of the invite to be a part of this table. Obviously, again, I always preface that this work has been happening well before this office has been here. And obviously everyone's on their own individual journey. And I'm very appreciative, right? As any pro and con, there's always opportunities that are given to all of us. So I'm just thankful. So yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Well, and thanks for being part of this. I before we started, Liz and Robyn asked me, what's this going to be like? I said, think about it like The View, that we'll talk with each other. Maybe have a few laughs, but also talk about some serious things, which all of us are mothers. All of us are focused on the future. When you look at what the common themes are, when people really stop to take back and understand what their, what they really want, their hopes are for the future. Our hopes are for the future, or for our children, for our grandchildren. And it doesn't really matter where you're coming from. So if you could hang on for one quick second, while I go ahead and finish this up. So thank you so much, Liz and Robyn, and please look forward, people, to having the three of us again on for the next 2 weeks. And remember, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Facebook page or send information or questions to us, or your comments. How do you feel about the different activities and challenges? So thank you. I certainly hope that you all enjoyed being a part of this, and gave you some things to think about. But in the meantime, if you're able to, you think about it, go on to the LEDA website, which I am trying to determine. There we go. Good. Onto our website, there is a pledge on there that over 200 people have taken and have signed, and there are 7 specific areas. Part of the pledge is to educate yourselves on equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to really focus on understanding. Doing this challenge helps put you a long way into achieving some of those elements in the pledge. So again, ethnicdiversity.org. And thank you so much for being a part of this.